This is Ambient Guitar Basics. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the fine art of ambient swells. Let's get to work. That's right, we're going to look at two different techniques for creating ambient swells, but before we get there, we need to set up our signal path to create a sound that will work well with ambient swells. Here's my clean tone. And it's not a bad tone. But it does have some limitations for ambient swells. Now listen to this note. There's not a lot of sustain, and that's not going to work as well for us as a note that has more sustain for the volume swell. So I'm going to add in a compressor. Oh, that's a lot more sustain. Here's without the compressor. With. Yeah, that's really nice. So as you will hear, that's really going to help us out as we use our swelling techniques. Next up, I've got a distortion. If you want dirtier tones, that's a great thing to have. Okay, and obviously you can set that up however you wish. I've got a little light crunch. And then we need something to create that ambience for the swell, and in this case I'm using a delay. You could also use a reverb pedal too, or you could use them both together. But here's my delay, that's the Strymon Dig. Just a really nice sound. All right, technique one for swelling is that big pedal in the middle of my pedal board, the one that says Morley. That's my volume pedal. There are many brands. I like Morley, but there are tons of different brands that do it very well. The technique is the same regardless of the brand. You've got two basic positions for the big pedal in the middle. You've got a heel position, and if you put it in the heel position, no signal gets through. If you put it in the toe position, push down, signal gets through. All right, what's the art? The art basically is learning how to swell in the volume with your foot. Obviously, it's going to sound a lot better with the delay pedal or the reverb pedal. And as you can hear, there's a ton of things you can do with the technique. You can do simple swells with full chords, or you can play leads. And if you're playing leads, you can turn on that distortion. Really nice. You can also use your fingers if you're a finger picker, or if you know how to do hybrid picking where you're combining the flat pick with your fingers, you can play multiple notes at the same time to swell in. Yeah, it's just some really nice sounds. Now, one thing I should mention, depending on where you have the volume pedal in the signal chain, you're going to have a constant gain structure coming into the volume pedal. So I've got my distortion turned back on. Listen to the distortion as I bring up the volume. Did you hear that? The gain structure is constant. It's the same level of distortion in the tone. I'm just raising the volume of that distortion. And that's the same way in terms of the clean tone, because the volume pedal sits after the compressor. So it's a really great technique for just keeping a very constant tone as you're bringing in the swells. All right, let's take a look at technique number 2, and that is very simple. It is using the volume knob on your guitar, and really, it is simple. You take your pinky finger and wrap it around the volume knob, and you simply use your pinky finger to move the volume knob up and down as you play notes and swell in the sound. So, got the volume turned all the way down. I'm going to play a note and bring it up. Yeah. You can do that with chords. And again, it sounds a lot better with the delay or the reverb that you might have set up. Now, you can use distortion with this technique too. Also with chords. So part of the trick with this technique is just working with the pinky finger to kind of get the coordination down with actually picking the note with, your pick between your thumb and your forefinger. And as you can imagine, it does favor down picks versus up picks. So you do have some limitations. There are probably some better volume knob swellers than I can't really do it, who can do an up pick and do the swell in. So I'm kind of stuck with the down picks. You're also limited in terms of how you might use your hand to create chords and notes. So for example, it's a lot harder to do hybrid picking with reaching your pinky finger down. Again, some better players may be able to do it. It's hard for me though. So I find it best for like kind of full chords and then, playing little leads or maybe like a double stop kind of thing. But one of the great things about using the volume knob is that it varies the gain structure moving through your signal path. What I mean by that is that the volume knob sits in front of the compressor and the distortion. So as you bring up the volume knob, the distortion level increases. And you can use that in a very creative, artful way to just create a very emotional line. So again, that is a lot different than the volume pedal. Here's the volume pedal doing the same basic thing. The volume knob. And the volume pedal, obviously. So the question is, which one is better? Well, the simple and short answer is neither is better. They're just different, and they create different sounding effects. Do you have experience with either, both, or one of these techniques? Which one do you prefer? So drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Also, if you've not subscribed to this channel, please do so. Hit that bell notification. I've got more ambient guitar basics coming up, and I'll see all of you on the next video. What we're going to do today, though, is kind of break down that chord progression and try to make it a little bit nicer. I mean, it sounds nice the way it is, but it's a little plain. And if you're like me and you may use multiple delays, or maybe you've got a chorus involved or a reverb involved in addition to the delay, things can get quite muddy when you're playing full bar chords. So how do we clean that up a little bit? Well, the key is, in my view, not to play all 6 notes. The key is to play just a few notes from each chord to kind of accentuate the specific intervals that you're looking for. So let's do a quick review of chords. Many of you already know this, but just bear with me. 2 minutes, just let me review this. So let's look at a C, just a standard C chord. Okay, you probably know that a C major chord is C, E, G, right? 3 notes. What you may or may not be aware of is that you can change the order of those 3 notes. You may have a root grouping of the notes, which is C, E, G, but you can also invert the intervals, and as a matter of fact, they're called inversions. So for example, in a C chord, if I want to start the chord on the E note, I'm playing a first inversion chord. Let me give you an example. Okay, so here's the root chord. First inversion. And then if I want to take that fifth, which would be the G, and put that in the bottom of the chord, that would be a second inversion. All right, so why am I telling you this? Well, the reason is that you can take advantage of these chord inversions and intervals to play partial chords as you're doing your volume swells, and really kind of clean up, again, the overall tone, and again, accentuate exactly what you're looking for. So let's take the chord progression and let's clean it up. We'll add my delay back in. Let's take a look at the E minor. Okay, so if we look at the E minor chord, the standard bar chord, you know, we've got all 6 notes involved. But what if we took just the E? Okay, so that would be the 5th string on the 7th fret, and then took a G on the 2nd string on the 8th fret. So that would be E and G. Let's try that. That's kind of nice, isn't it? It's very clear sounding too. So I've got an E, and then I've got a G, which is again the 8th fret on the 2nd string. All right, so that's a lot cleaner than this. Again, they're both nice sounding, but if you want less notes and accentuated notes, playing 2 notes instead of 6 is a nice option. Now, what about that D chord? Well, you know, if we just slide these 2 notes down to the D on the 5th fret of the 5th string, and then the F sharp, which would be the 7th fret of the 2nd string, we get a D major chord. Pretty nice, huh? Let's try that again. E minor, to D major. And now we've got to deal with the G major. Again, here's the full bar chord. You may like that, you may want it for your song, but in this case, I didn't want that full chord. So maybe if I just play the 6th string on the 3rd fret, which is a G, right? And then the 3rd fret on the 2nd string, which is a D. So that would be a G and a D. It leaves out the B, so it's neither major or minor. It's just kind of a modal sounding G. Let's try that. I like it. You could also just leave that 2nd string open and have the B, which would give you a distinct G major. Very clear sounding. Finally, we have the C major. Now on my song, I don't play a standard C major, I play a C9. So that would actually be, if you played a full chord, it would be C, E, G, D. So D would be the 9th, an octave plus 2 above the lower C. In this case though, I'm just going to play a C and a D. So that would be the C, which would be the 3rd fret on the 5th string, and the D, which would be the 3rd fret on the 2nd string. Let's listen to that. I'm a big fan of 9th chords. If you listen to much Chords of Orion music, you'll hear a lot of 9ths hanging around because I really like the tonality of 9ths. So let's try that whole chord progression together. E minor, D, G, and then C, add 9. All right, I'm going to show you now another way to play the G chord and the C chord to kind of keep it in line with what we're doing with the E minor and the D major. So this is an alteration, or an alternate version. So let's try this. G, I can actually play with a B in the bass. So that would be first inversion. So this would be your A string, your 5th string on the 2nd fret, and still the 2nd fret on the 2nd string on the 3rd fret. Let's listen to that. You hear that? You don't get that low G. You get the. It's an unresolved kind of sound. Now, for the C chord, what we can do is simply kind of move up. So I'm going to play the C, which would be that 3rd fret on the 5th string, and I'm going to play an E. So that would be the major, right? Which would be the 2nd string on the 5th fret. All right. Now, let's listen to the entire chord progression with this version of the G and the C chords. Isn't that nice? I would encourage you to play around with this, practice it a little bit. If you're not used to playing different inversion chords, try this out. Now, what about the right hand? I do need to discuss that a little bit. So some of you are used to simply strumming an entire chord. And if I only want to play 2 notes out of the chord, I've got a problem. You may have noticed over the last few minutes that I'm actually holding the pick. Sorry, I'm looking at my camera monitor here. I'm holding the pick with 2 fingers, but I'm also using another finger to pick a string. We'll get into this a little bit more in future episodes, but this is really the beginning of what I call hybrid picking. So it's a combination of flat picking and finger picking. So you've got a couple of options. You can use the thumb and a finger, Okay, so that works pretty cool. If you're like me, or if you want to learn this, you can use the hybrid picking. So let me hold my guitar up here. So I don't know how well you can see this, but I've got the pick on the 5th string and my middle finger on the 2nd string, and I'm going to kind of pull them together to play the 2 notes. Okay. All right. So you can practice that. You've got a choice. Thumb and whichever finger is comfortable, or pick and whichever finger is comfortable. Your choice. Give it a try though, and see how you do with that. If you're not used to this, if you're already a finger picker, finger style guitar player, piece of cake. You already know how to do this. Let me show you one other thing here before we close out this episode. Once you've got this chord progression down, with these chord inversions, you can begin to extend them. And again, if you listen to the song off of Slumber, again, I'll include the link, you'll hear some of the things that I do. Let me give you just a couple of examples to consider. On the E minor chord, what if I played the E and the G, as I have, but then added in a high C with my little pinky finger on the 8th fret of the high E string. So that would be a C. So let's try that. But I'm not going to play them all 3 together. I'm going to play the 2 and that together and then bring in that high C. Check this out. Let me do that again. All right. Now, what if I brought in a B, which would be that E string on the 7th fret, in on the D major chord? Yeah. And what if I brought a high G in on my G chord? So that would be the 3rd fret. You kind of get the picture of what's going on here. You've got a lot of options for extending these types of chords. After you practice a little bit, you can go a little faster and you can really begin to play around with a lot of partial chords. Welcome to How to Play Ambient Guitar, episode 22. Today I'd like to spend a few minutes looking at how to incorporate string bending into your ambient guitar lead playing. So let's get right down to work. First of all, you'll need a lead tone, a distorted lead tone, and I actually did an entire episode on that. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. Here's the tone that I'm using today. It's basically a little bit of a compressor and a Strymon overdrive. If you don't have the Riverside, you can use whatever distortion pedal you have, and I'm sure you'll get a tone that's somewhat similar. In addition to that, I'm using some reverb. And that's just a hall room type of reverb, and of course some delay. And as you can hear, I've got a good bit of delay going, and that's because for this demo, I'm going to be using the volume pedal for the lead playing that I'm going to do. And that brings me to tip number 1, incorporate string bending with your volume pedal. So, if you think about typical, maybe blues style string bends, okay, that's pretty cool, but if you add in some delay and use a volume pedal with it, I think it gets kind of cooler. All right, so if you use the volume pedal to chop the attack off of your note, string bendings turn into, in my view, kind of like otherworldly sounding whale sounds, if you will, which can be really cool. So there are several different ways you can use string bending with a volume pedal. The first one that you just heard is a bend up in pitch. Okay, and that's pretty typical. If I turn off the delay, here's what it sounds like. Delay on. All right, so that's cool. Tip number 2 is to bend down. And this is a little trickier because before you bring the volume pedal up, you've got to get the string bend in position so you can go down. So what I mean is, let me explain here a little better. Typically in a string bend, you go up and then down, right? All right, in this case, we're going to start in the up position of the pitch and go down. Okay? And that sounds really cool with delay and a volume pedal. And it's kind of nice if you've got a, say, this E here, the B string on the 5th fret. That is a fixed note, right? It's just fretted. So if I play that note, and then the next note is my the same E, but on the 3rd string, bent up, you know, essentially a whole tone or 2 frets worth of pitch, it's kind of cool in terms of the effect. Anyhow, that takes a little bit of practice. I don't, you know, as I play, sometimes I'll record and use it. Sometimes I have to go back and do 2 or 3 takes to get it right, because it can be a little tricky, in particular if you don't practice that a good bit. But give that a try and see what you think. Tip number 3 is string bending as you bring the volume pedal down to cut off the tone. So let me show you what I mean. First of all, I'm going to play a tone and then quickly cut the tone off with the volume pedal. Without the delay. Okay, now what if I add a bend up as I'm lowering the volume pedal? So what if I, right, so maybe a half step bend, one fret bend. So let's try that out. Turn on the delay. So you hear how the when you bring the volume pedal down quickly, as you're bending, it chops off the bend. That's pretty cool. And then that brings me to my last tip for this video, and you probably heard it. As you're string bending up, you can bend up to the same note on another string that is the fixed pitch. In other words, it's not a bent string, it's just a fixed pitch. So let me show you what I mean with this E string, or this E pitch, or this E note here. Okay, again, this is E, 5th fret on the B string. And I'm going to start on the G string, the 3rd string on the 7th fret. That is a D. Okay, and I'm going to bend up to an E, and then I'm going to very quickly move the volume pedal down and bring it back up and play the E on the 5th fret of the B string. So let's see if I can do that. Kind of cool, huh? And you probably heard the F sharp to the G. And I didn't bring the volume pedal down on that one, which is another cool effect. So what I'm doing there is bending up a half a step, and then I'm letting go of the bend with my 3rd finger as my 4th finger hits the G. On this episode, I'd like to answer a question that I've gotten a lot of over the last few years on the channel. And that question is, hey Bill, should I put my volume pedal before or after my distortion pedal in the signal chain? And I think that is a great question, because where you place your volume pedal in relationship to your distortion pedal really makes a big difference in the sound. So let's check it out. Get to work. All right, on the floor, let me review the pedals in use. I'm going from my guitar into a compressor, the blue Wampler Ego. From there, I currently have the compressor feeding right into my distortion pedal, which is a Strymon Riverside. From that point, I'm actually going into my amp modeling unit, and then the signal's coming out of the effects send into my volume pedal. And then from there it goes on into delay and reverb. So in effect, whether you have an effects loop or not, in effect, the order is compressor, distortion, volume pedal. And here's my clean tone real quick. All right. And then here is my distorted tone. Okay, now let me play that tone with the volume pedal, and then let's talk about it. All right, so if you think about what you just heard, the distortion level is consistent. It never changes. The volume pedal just increases or reduces the overall volume of the distorted tone, but it doesn't change the gain. So listen again here. Hear how the distortion level is consistent? Even though the volume of that distorted tone is going up and down, the actual amount of distortion is not changing. And that is what you get when you place the volume pedal after the overdrive or the distortion pedal. Make sense? So why would you place it in that fashion? Well, one reason that I can think of, and that I normally do this, is because it's very good for playing leads with, I think, for playing leads with echo, delay, reverb, that type of thing. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so you hear with the reverb and the delay, actually the two delays. It's two delays and a reverb. The more Ocean Machine. You can check out a review of that. I just did one recently. It's cool. Anyhow, with all of that ambience, between the delay and reverb going on, I find it helpful to have a consistent gain that's just moving up and down in volume. In other words, a consistent level of distortion. So the thickness of the tone doesn't change. It just gets louder or softer. So it's a nice consistent tonality all through the lead playing. So that's the first way that you can do this. I'm going to go ahead and rewire this thing, and let's check it out in the other order. All right, through the magic of video, I've instantly rewired my setup. And as you can see, I now am going from my Wampler Ego compressor to the volume pedal to the Strymon Riverside. And here's the clean tone. Pretty much the same as the other order. And when I add in the delays and reverbs, all right, so all good there. So let's kick in the overdrive. I'm not actually going to kick it in. Let's turn it on, and let's see what we get. Now, that's a different sound, isn't it, than the other setup. So you can hear that the gain structure actually changes as I increase the volume. There's not as much distortion as the sound begins to increase in volume. And if you happen to, like I'm doing here a little bit, if you happen to use the volume pedal, if you rock it back and forth very quickly, you can almost get a trumpet kind of a sound. And let me go ahead and put the reverb and the delays in. That actually is a pretty cool sound, isn't it? Now, I said I normally have my effects pedals lined up in the other direction with the distortion before the volume pedal, but I do occasionally flip the order around into this configuration when I want that more trumpet kind of sound. And it's a lot like in this configuration, it's a lot like just using the volume knob on your guitar. Right, so let me turn the goodies on here. Okay, let's try the volume pedal. So there you have it. There's a couple different ways to skin this cat. And like I said at the beginning of the video, they both have very different sounds. Now, which one is right? Which one should you go with? Well, I think it depends on the sound that you're looking for. If you want a more consistent gain structure without the distortion level kind of going up and down, then put your volume pedal after the distortion or overdrive. If your overdrive reacts well to, like volume controls and things like that, and you want that variable distortion level, then you might want to consider putting the volume pedal before your overdrive. If you have more than one overdrive, here's another idea. You might want to put one before the volume pedal and one after the volume pedal. So volume pedals in between the two. And that way, you have the best of both worlds. You can go, either direction, whatever you're feeling like or whatever the song requires. If you've not already done so, I would love it if you would subscribe to Chords of Orion. I've got ambient guitar-related content coming every week. Tips and tricks, equipment demos, and performance videos of some of my music. Speaking of my music, if you haven't already done so, you can check it out on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, Bandcamp. I'll put all the links there for you to click on. And as always, I'll see all of you on the next video. Welcome to How to Play Ambient Guitar, episode 20. On today's video, I'd like to show you a really cool effect that combines hybrid picking and the use of a volume pedal. All right, so if you haven't already done so, you may want to check out episode 2 of How to Play Ambient Guitar, which focuses on voicing chords for volume swells. And you may also want to check out episode 9, which covers hybrid picking and flat picking in the context of ambient guitar. All right, so you heard the music I played at the beginning. Kind of cool. There's a rhythmic thing going on. Okay, and there's also volume swells going on at the same time. So let's break it down and see how I got that effect. Okay, the first thing we want to do, or maybe you might want to do, what I did is I set up my guitar with a clean tone. So let's check that out real quick. Okay, and by the way, this is a baritone guitar. You can do the same exact thing with a standard guitar too, or a 7-string guitar, 8-string guitar, whatever kind of guitar you play. This concept will apply. All right, so get your clean tone and then throw a little compressor on it just to squash the dynamics and produce a little more sustain. Okay, next you'll want to throw in just a little bit of overdrive. I'm using the Strymon Riverside. Again, you're not required to use the Riverside. Use whatever you have. Just make sure it's an overdrive, not a fuzz or heavy metal kind of distortion pedal. Something you can get some mellow distortion with. So here's what it sounds like on this guitar and this Strymon Riverside. Okay, so just a little grit in there. Okay, but not a lot. All right, that's the basic sound. The next thing you'll want to do is set up a volume pedal. So, again, just standard stuff that we've covered here a lot. And then after that, you'll want to set up a delay. And what I've got set up is the Source Audio Nemesis, and just listen to this delay. Okay, and this is a stereo ping pong delay. If you're listening on a stereo system, you can probably hear the delay going back and forth. If you want to use a mono delay, that is cool too. It's all good. And if you listen to the delay interval, okay, so that's going to put each repeat probably at about 300, 350 milliseconds, because I'm tracking a little bit faster than 1 beat per second, 60 BPM, probably tracking at 65 to 70. Okay, so think about that, maybe about a 300 millisecond delay. And you can hear that I've got the repeats turned up, so we get maybe, 7, 8 seconds of repeats going with a delay. And then finally, this is optional. If you have one available, you may want to throw in a little bit of reverb. Okay, so I've got the New Neighbor Immerse going. You can use whatever reverb pedal you may have. Could be the Boss RV6, could be the Strymon Blue Sky, Big Sky, whatever clouds, whatever it might be, okay? Get a little bit of reverb going, and if you do have the option to adjust the pre-delay, set it up so there is some delay. So listen to this reverb. Okay, hear how the pre-delay kind of blooms after I pick the note. You'll want to try to go for something like that. All right, so that is a walkthrough of all the effects. Now, let's talk about the playing technique. We're going to do some hybrid picking again. Episode 9, if you haven't seen it yet. We're going to play just your standard 6/7 root chord progression. So for you standard guitar players, that would be like the classic C, D, E minor kind of thing. I'm doing this in baritone land, so it's actually G, A, and then B minor. Okay, so this would be G and B, A, and B minor. And let me turn that delay off. Okay, so. Okay, again, if you're in standard guitar tuning, that's C, D, E minor. All right? Now, here's where it gets fun. Hybrid picking. What we're going to want to do is pick the bass notes in time with the delay. So if you've got a standard guitar, hit that 6th string, your low E. If you've got a baritone like me, it's the low B. Just start picking that and listen to the repeats of your delay. Okay? So get your tempo going in your mind and imagine that the delay, every time you hear a repeat, that's an 8th note. And what you're going to want to do is pick on the quarter note. Okay, so not too bad. Okay, that's about the rhythm, or the tempo, I should say. Now we're going to need some hybrid picking to get that chord in. And the goal here is to keep this rhythm on your low string going. I got to learn how to play guitar someday. So we're going to keep that rhythm going while we begin to pick other strings with our fingers. Again, hybrid picking in effect. So let's check it out here. I'm going to play the 2nd string on the 3rd fret, 2nd string on the 5th fret, and 2nd string on the 7th fret while I'm keeping the rhythm on that low 6th string. So the low E for standard, low B for baritone. Here we go. Okay, you hear what I'm doing? I'm also using a palm mute on that low string. Otherwise, it would be... And, you know, you can do that if that's what you like. I kind of prefer the muted, so I just kind of put the palm of my hand on the 6th string by the bridge, just to mute it a little bit. Okay, so go ahead and practice that. When you get that down till it's kind of smooth, you can kind of go from there. The next thing we're going to look at is playing more of a chord, again, while we're keeping that low string rhythm going. So what I'm going to do is add in a 9th chord here. Okay, it's not a full chord, but it's the root and the 9th. Okay? But I'm going to keep that rhythm going. So let's see how I do here. It'll probably be a little messy. Okay, does that make sense? So we're just going to combine those two elements together, and that's going to give us the basis of this chord progression when we begin to add the effects back in. And we're going to do that right now. Let me go ahead and throw the delay in, and I'm going to try just what I played with the delay. Here we go. Got to get my rhythm right, my tempo right. That's pretty cool. Let's throw a little reverb in there and hear what it sounds like with all the effects. Yeah, that's nice. All right, so there's a problem that I hear though, and it's annoying me a little bit, and that is the high string. Again, if you're in standard guitar, it's a D, right? That 2nd string on the 3rd fret. If I am just picking like I am doing, the repeats of that higher pitch is kind of annoying me a little bit. Okay, it's not bad, but as I was kind of putting this together, I was thinking, I'd like something a little smoother, and that's where the volume pedal comes in. So this is where things get a little tricky. So I've got the inset there, so you're going to want to watch my foot in terms of the volume pedal. And basically what I'm going to do is, we're still going to do the rhythm. I'm going to turn off the effects just for a minute here. Right? So I'm still going to do that rhythm, but every time I play the chord, or the 9th interval, instead of just picking it, I'm going to swell it in with a volume pedal, but I'm not going to stop the rhythm on the low string. So let's check that out without the effects. Here we go. Does that make sense? So it's actually going to be on that downbeat, right? Beat number 1 of the measure, we're going to be playing 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the volume swell is on beat number 1, and then the regular pick is going to be on 2, 3, and 4. Okay? And once we add in the delay and the reverb, it's all going to mix together. And because of the reverb repeat at the 8th note interval, you're not going to miss playing that one low string on the downbeat, on the 1. It's all going to kind of smear together and it'll make sense. Here we go. That a lot. And one of the cool things is that you can drop out the rhythm and go to just volume swells and really kind of change the texture. Let me show you what I mean here. I like that a lot. So you can really kind of play around with textures and rhythms using the combination of hybrid picking and volume swell pedals. So there you have it. It's kind of what I might consider an advanced technique. And if you have not really played around with hybrid picking, it may take a little while to get the coordination between your flat pick and your fingers. By the way, if you are a thumb picker, now I don't have my thumb pick available, you could do the same thing with thumb pick and fingers also. All right, hope you enjoyed that. And as always, if you haven't done so, please subscribe to my channel. I've got ambient guitar-related content coming every week. And if you're interested, I'd love it if you would check out Chords of Orion Music. And as always, I'll see all of you on the next video. Hey everyone, I'm Bill Vencil. This is Chords of Orion, and yeah, there is a secret to volume pedals that I don't hear too many people talking about. And this characteristic can really affect the way you interact with the volume pedal. It's the taper of the swell. That is, how quickly the volume swells in, or slowly the volume swells in when you push down on the volume pedal. There are two types of taper when it comes to volume pedals, the linear taper and the audio taper. As you can see in the diagram, the linear taper is a constant increase in volume across the sweep of the volume pedal. The audio taper, on the other hand, increases volume slowly, more slowly, and then kind of rushes in at the end of the pedal travel. Now I've got two volume pedals on my pedal board to demonstrate the difference. They're both made by Morley. The one in black is the Little Alligator, and that pedal has a linear taper. The red pedal is the Stereo Chorus volume pedal, and that pedal has an audio taper. So let's check it out a little bit. I've just got a dry tone here. Nothing crazy. And I'm going to go ahead and swell in first with the little alligator, and then I'll swell in with the stereo volume chorus. This is the linear taper. Okay, let's try the audio taper. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait, I didn't hear a whole lot of difference. Well, let's take that a little bit slower. Let's go back to the audio taper, the little alligator. Now, watch my foot as I swell in. What you probably saw there was hardly anything, and then something. And so what the linear taper does is it tends to swell in pretty quickly towards the, even though you can't hear it for a little bit, once it comes in, it begins to swell in pretty quickly. Okay, now check out the audio taper. Just watch my foot carefully. You can begin to hear the volume come in earlier in the travel. However, when I move my foot a little bit quicker, it doesn't seem to swell in quite as quickly. Once the audio taper, or once the linear taper, begins to swell in, it does tend to come in more quickly. So this is actually a pretty big deal depending on how you're using a volume pedal. Let me demonstrate. I'm going to go ahead and turn on a delay plugin. That plugin is the Valhalla DSP delay. Here are the settings. Boom. Okay, first, I want to go ahead and try playing with the linear taper. So that's the little alligator, the black pedal, with the delay. Here we go. Oh yeah, that's cool. Now I want to go ahead and try the audio taper with the same plugin. Let's hear what that sounds like. It's very subtle, but if you listen carefully, you can hear a difference in the speed of the swell. Now, what you may have noticed just then is that I had to move my foot further on the red pedal, the audio taper, to get the same relative swell sound versus the black pedal. And so for me, I generally tend to prefer the linear taper when I'm playing fast swells. Let me demonstrate. Now let me play that same basic line with the audio taper, the red pedal, and let's hear the difference, or maybe you can watch the difference with my foot. So you might be thinking, Bill, you're right. This is why nobody's talking about the taper. I don't really care. And that's true. It may not matter to you. Both of these pedals sound great. I really like them both. But they do have a different feel to each one. It is subtle. And I think a lot of the decision point, or whether or not you care about it, depends on precisely how you're using a volume pedal. Are you using the volume pedal mostly for long, flowing, mellow swells? In that case, the audio taper might be a better choice for you. Do you tend to use volume pedals for faster, perhaps more complex types of volume swells? Well, maybe that linear taper pedal might be a better option for you. Now, I haven't canvassed every volume pedal on the market, but I have a feeling that more of them tend towards the audio taper versus the linear taper. But if you've got the Line 6 Helix or HX Stomp series, or the Headrush kind of gear, the pedal board or the MX5, or the Fractal Audio gear, one thing that's great about all of those units is that when you set up a patch that involves a volume pedal, they all have adjustable sweeps on the volume pedal. In fact, some of them actually say linear taper and audio taper. So if you do use some of the different multi-effects pedals, you may very well just have that adjustment that you can make when you set up a patch. And I would encourage you, if you do have that option, to try them both out to see which one you prefer. Well, there you go. I hope this little secret tip was helpful. If you've got a preference for audio versus linear taper, go ahead and drop a comment below. Also, if you're looking to buy equipment from Sweetwater, I've got affiliate links in the video description. It really helps out the channel if you decide to use those links. Got some videos here on how to play ambient guitar, and I'll see all of you over on those videos.